The year 2010 commemorates the Bicentennial of Mexican independence, and thus it marks 200 years of bilateral relations with the United States. As part of the celebration, the Council of Foreign Relations and the Consulate General of Mexico in New York City held a panel between the ambassadors from both countries to analyze the current state of these relations and the challenges for the 21st century. The moderator was HITN's Destination Casablanca host, Ray Suarez.
How far from God Mexico is really up to Mexicans, but they have no choice at this point about being close to the United States, which is going to be the state of play, one assumes, in perpetuity. So let me welcome our guest, Mexico's ambassador to the United States, Arturo Sarukhan, and our own ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Mexico, Carlos Pascual. And gentlemen, there's so much to talk about in the security realm, in the trade realm, immigration, cultural exchanges. It's, you know, we could sit here and talk all day. We won't. But let me get your view. Let me get your view. If I needed a thumbnail description from a diplomat of today's state of play, November 2010, this relationship between our countries. Ambassador.
I think regardless of what the electoral outcome might have been, but including taking into account changed position in the House, one of the things that I think the United States has to recognize is how important Mexico is to us. I think sometimes there's a perception in the United States that the United States is doing for Mexico, that we're helping them with their security, that we're helping them get their problems under control. We forget that Mexico is our #2 trading partner in the world. We forget that we export to Mexico more than we do to China, more than to the newly industrialized countries of Asia combined. Second only to Canada.
I think that the thumbnail description of this relationship is a huge opportunity to fulfill the strategic parameters that this relationship provides to both countries. The border is certainly a 3,000-kilometer region which does provide for huge challenges, some of them that we are facing together as we speak, but it certainly also opens up huge opportunities for both countries to change fundamentally the nature of the game between both countries. I don't think that we have seen the commitment on both sides of the Rio Grande, both in Washington, D.C. and in Mexico City, that we have seen today in terms of ensuring that this relationship regains a strategic footing since the days of NAFTA.
But besides recognizing the strong potential when it comes to trade, the ambassadors also recognize that the drug traffic and violence are big challenges for the governments on both sides of the border.
Some of it may have become more acute in the last 2 years as President Calderon and the government has taken actions and as our cooperation and the Merit Initiative have become sharper. And it's not surprising to see the cartels react, but the interesting thing is that what I think they are pushing for is, they're the ones who are pushing for a return to the past. They're the ones who are pushing for a return to that period of impunity when there was no consequence to the violence. And so I think it forces us to continue to challenge ourselves is how do we work on these issues in a way that can have an impact and in the end take us from violence to creating a prospect of really having a more secure environment with the rule of law. But we kid ourselves if we think that it was the confrontation with violence that brought on the violence. This was something that is rooted in something much deeper.
The only way that this decision will see us through with the results that we all want to see is sustained efforts on both sides of the border. It will not only be that the next Mexican administration continues to rebuild civilian institutions, to strengthen the judiciary, to bring in civil society, to provide watchdog capabilities to what is being done, how you build straighter social cohesion, but it will also force the United States and Mexico to remain committed. Because if we can't fundamentally, and look, I know the political lay of the land in this country, but if we can't fundamentally, within what's in the books today, modify the current flow of weapons and bulk cash which are coming from the United States into Mexico and which provide the drug syndicates with their firepower and their ability to corrupt, it will be a very taxing challenge. And we need sustained U.S. commitment with a long-term strategy to change what will be a generational challenge for both countries. And the thing that has to be told very clearly, Ray, to citizens on both sides of the border is, we will succeed or we will fail together.
Later on, during the Q&A session, the issue of drugs was revisited, and Ambassador Pascual took the opportunity to highlight the steps the current administration has taken to reduce demand.
You didn't, in your list of issues, talk about drug demand, and that's one of the things that we need to put a stronger emphasis on, and this administration has developed, I think, a more comprehensive and creative demand reduction strategy than we've seen in the past, dealing with issues from prevention to treatment to working with addicts to working with prisoners to providing job alternatives to community grant programs, and we've increased the budget for that.
But drugs, violence, and border security were not the only topics of discussion. Immigration also took the spotlight, as the issue is still a great matter of concern for both governments. And certainly it plays a key role on the bilateral relationship between the two countries.
That's why I started my remarks on immigration reform, that there were two sides to the same coin, and that Mexico had to achieve or attempt to achieve things that had been untenable or they had been unwilling to do previous governments in the past. Number one is to anchor those jobs in Mexico, create enough well-paid jobs so that 200,000, 300,000 women and men don't have to cross the border into the United States because they're seeking a better paid job.
And Ambassador, if I may, when you say well-paid, they don't have to be as well-paid as the jobs people would find in Denver or Phoenix. They just have to be well-paid enough that it looks like a better shot to stay with your own parents and friends and the town you know.
So we have to anchor those jobs because, quite bluntly, our loss is the gain of the U.S. economy. These people are bold, entrepreneurial, some of them talented, and by losing them, we're losing Mexico's ability to reinvest its human capital and to trigger that type of growth and anchor those jobs in Mexico. The second fundamental equation of this is that Mexico needs to ensure, at the end of the day, that every Mexican that crosses the border into the United States does so legally and be through a designated port of entry. And this has been, for many generations, for many governments in Mexico, a very tough nut to swallow, because the question obviously is, well, are you willing to do something to prevent people from actually crossing portions of the border where they shouldn't be crossing? And that is one of the challenges that Mexico will have to look into.
And I think that's part of what we have to understand, that the issue for so many Mexicans is not just a question of seeking to take somebody's job. It's somehow how to give an opportunity to ask parts of their family. But what they want is not to go and stay. It's to go and return, or in fact, frankly, to be able to stay to begin with. The other part of this equation, that's at 5:30, right? Okay, so you have my commercial announcement there. But the other part of this issue is that, Mexico, it's part of the contrast to the multiple realities of Mexico. I mean, there are 47 million poor people in Mexico based on Mexican government statistics. And that's the bad news. The positive thing is that because it's also a G20 country, it has the 12th, 13th largest economy in the world, a sophisticated banking sector, but it's a banking sector that doesn't penetrate. And some of these guys can tell you and will tell you a little bit more about this later. But it lends itself to solutions, or at least interventions, that can make a difference. In Mexico, 25% of the population has access to a bank account. In the US and Europe, it would be somewhere between 90 and 99%. In Chile, it's 60%. In Brazil, it's 48%. Cell phones. There are now commercial projects being developed to allow for the use of cell phones to people to be able to pay their bills. If you could use that, for example, in the Oportunidades program that we were mentioning before, where you transmit the payments vis-a-vis a cell phone notice, and you take it to your local 7-Eleven, and the mechanism for that is that the individual now has a bank account which draws down the money. You've suddenly brought 15 million people into the banking sector that were never there before. those kinds of things can be done in Mexico that don't have the same prospect in other countries, that I think can give people a sense of hope that there are the mechanisms to help eradicate some of these problems.
Thank you to our two ambassadors, and it's probably one of the few times that a Mexican, a Cuban, and a Puerto Rican have shared the stage at the Council on Foreign Relations rather than being the opening line of a joke. So thank you for all.
Or the parade on Fifth Avenue.